black man given worst job in America. President's had a rough time. He's had a very intransigent group of people who are just, you know, right now he's being sued by the Republicans for slowing down something they don't want him to do. Okay. What alternative universe has a president, any party, anytime, been subjected to goofiness like this? I think he's put the marker down on the carbon rule. I think he'll go to the mat. I think it was done very well. I think it'll withstand the legal assault and the political assault. If we all do our jobs in engaging the public and hand-to-hand combat over the next 2 election cycles, I think we win. Great question. Thank you. Now,
I have a question
sure.
in regards to the EPA proposal.
And you are?
Sorry, my name's Susan.
Uh-huh.
I'm here in the Boston office.
And where are you from?
I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay.
So relocated here to Portland. But yeah, so I'm wondering kind of like what type of state laws, state regulations that we have in Oregon. A lot of people have, at the door, sort of been curious because they're like, oh, well, don't we have really great environmental policies in Oregon? Like, how is this federal legislation going to change anything here? And so, yeah, I guess my question is specifically, are there any big changes that we'll see in Oregon as a result of passing this EPA proposal?
Yeah, we have, it's a mixed bag in Oregon. We have some good stuff. We have some that's not quite so good. We have some stuff that's not so bad, but it is unevenly enforced. Some of the folks have been starving our DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality. So it's had budget problems for years. But these core permits in terms of water quality, that's overarching, that supersedes. That, and it is a very powerful tool. So it's, and water has this curious property. It doesn't stop at city boundaries, the county line, state borders. In fact, we do a very curious thing. We often use bodies of water for boundaries. How definitive is that? You know, the stuff in the middle of the Columbia River doesn't, you know, observe that hypothetical line on a map. So it's the federal protections are important. There are problems with some of the local enforcement, and as a matter of fact, this is why the Clean Water Act and why it's so goofy for the Supreme Court to try and narrow the application is because this water is connected in a great big cycle of oceans, lakes, rivers, and streams.
So assuming this, oh sorry, my name's Heather. I'm originally from the Southwest Las Vegas area. I moved to Portland recently. So I'm super excited to be here.
We're excited to have you.
Thank you. So assuming this EPA rule is passed, what do you see as the next step here in Oregon towards ensuring that clean water?
Well, I am hopeful that this will be part, and what you're doing is part of a much broader conversation about how we're going to protect water resources. We've got real challenges. We, for example, in the Klamath River Basin, we've kind of committed more than nature can deliver, and we've got obligations to the environment, we've got obligations to Native Americans, and we lured farmers, 3 generations of farmers, to go down there and make the desert bloom. And it doesn't work very well because there's not enough water. So our commitment, I think, and this is part of a very important conversation for people to think about how we're managing water resources, whether it's in the Klamath River Basin, whether we do a better job in terms of some of the pesticides, agricultural runoff. We've done a pretty good job with specific point pollution from factories. But there's a lot of pesticide, fertilizer, animal waste that still finds its way into the Willamette, for instance. So I'm hopeful that we can do a better job of thinking about how we conserve the water resources, how we protect water quality, and we do so in a way that's sensitive to our agricultural interests. I was responsible for the city of Portland for a while for the Bureau of Environmental Services. It was dealing with the wastewater, stormwater runoff, sewage. At the time, I had hoped that we might spend a fraction of the money that we were spending on really big pipes. Maybe take a little bit of that money and spend it upstream to help the farmers and ranchers, to keep stuff out in the first place, and maybe look at some opportunities that were softer and greener. Daylighting creeks, passive treatment. We're seeing some of it now. You see it in some of the streets where people are planting bioswales. And I think this is part of a fundamental reassessment of what we are going to do with water quality, water quantity, and I hope the federal government is a better partner with you, that we do a better job with the next Farm Bill to be able to protect water resources, higher emphasis on conservation, and frank discussion about what are the limits in terms of what we can expect, like in the Klamath River Basin. Gee, we have a wildlife refuge there. It's the only wildlife refuge where there's farming in the United States, and it's water intensive. You know, potatoes, alfalfa, maybe not the smartest thing we should be doing. So it's part of these other connections. Sir?
Yes. First of all, thank you again for being here. My name is Levi. I'm originally from Seattle. I've been living in Portland for like 3 years and loving it here. The environment is so often sort of represented as a really partisan issue, but from my experience talking to people at their door, it's something that the majority of the public supports, you know, taking some sort of action on.
Yes.
What do we need to do to get more members of Congress to accurately reflect sort of the will and desire of the public?
Well, you are helping do that. I mean, the extent to which you're able to engage folks, and we find that, you know, when it comes to clean water, that's actually not so much a red state, blue state issue. It is actually something that people don't want to boil their water. People don't want an algae bloom that, you know, they have to use water in Toledo. What happened in West Virginia? You know, it's just horrific. Many of these environmental issues actually bring people together. It's part of the conservation, habitat restoration. You get the Hook and Bullet Club. You know, people who hunt and fish, people who want to hike and recreate. They tune in. Now we have to be careful because there's a concerted effort to try and draw bright red lines. There's a concerted effort to try and characterize efforts at environmental protection as some sort of social engineering, a communist plot, or a blue state plot. You know, it's Portland versus the rest of Oregon. No. And so your experience on the doorstep reflects what I've seen, but that's where the personal connection that you're providing is so important, because you can move past sort of the reflex and go one level deeper and find that lots of people are concerned about climate change. People are obsessive about clean air and clean water. Kids with asthma really touches people where they live. Great point, and I think that's why your summer activities make such a big difference.
So you know me, Ricky Seguin, work with Environment Oregon, originally from Atlanta. As you can see on our thermometers up there, we're doing a ton of work this summer, talking to about 45,000 people about this clean water rule, as well as the EPA's Clean Power Plan. And it feels like, with all the conversations we're having, that this is just an issue that everyone cares about and everyone should care about: clean water, clean air. What are you hearing in DC? I mean, in the House of Representatives, are these issues things that other representatives are talking about, or are these as big of a deal as we feel like they are?
For some of my colleagues, they're a big deal. You don't have to convince Jeff Merkley that he needs to fight for clean air and clean water. Governor Inslee in state of Washington has been talking about ocean acidification for as long as I've known Jim. There are some people for whom it's going to require getting their attention. It's going to require making it more relevant at home with voters, because they're going to skate along. They're going to deal with the pressure group du jour, or the people who are their friends and supporters. And a lot of them have friends and supporters who are not necessarily prioritizing clean air and clean water. And I would say, sadly, half the men and women in Congress, not a priority. It's when there's an explosion of something that they can't ignore, or when people push back. And that's part of our challenge, is to have more people pushing back. And when I say half, that may be generous, because in this business, you have more issues come at you in a day than you can count. If it moves, it's got a lobby. You know, there are 9 gazillion political action committees. There are all sorts of people with interesting ideologies, and there are, and I don't mean to trivialize, because there are many, many people who are passionate about things that may not be on your radar screen, but they're pounding the halls of Congress. So there's competition. And you would think that there would be more competition for things like clean air and clean water. But that's not always the case. Somebody want the last word?
I know I asked a question already.
You did. So we may have somebody else have the last word, but you take the next word.
But I did want to ask you if you could speak a little bit from your personal experience and how you became involved with this work and what led you down the road into politics in the first place.
I was a student at Lewis and Clark and spent a lot of time in the library with these big, fat, thick hearing books about Senate Foreign Relations, and just became outraged about the war in Vietnam and what people were saying. And one thing led to another, and I got involved with the campaign to lower the voting age in Oregon. I directed that campaign. I had a chance to testify before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee while I was still in college, and got excited about both the prospect of influencing the political process, and words will never escape me, where there was a young woman who was the student body president of Ashland High School who was campaigning with us in Roseburg in Douglas County. And so we went out to try and drum up support for the voting age thing. We came back to a Denny's or something, and we were having this debriefing over a milkshake, and Jane Davis said, "I could be mayor of Roseburg." Yeah, Jane, you probably could. And just the sense that we can do this stuff. And 2 years later, I was in the Oregon legislature, and I've been doing it ever since. But that's how I got involved. So somebody want the real last word? Yes, sir.
I was going to give you the last word.
You are?
I'm Kyle. I'm an Oregon native. I went to Portland State. And you know, he's